Amish Romance. What is it? Perhaps more importantly, why is it? I've been intrigued by the concept of this genre for quite some time. I discovered it while I was in the process of publishing my own book, Quest for the Sea's Revenge. You should get it. Because while I was listing my book for sale, I had to select its genre from a drop-down menu that was arranged alphabetically. So when I opened it, the first thing I saw was Amish Romance, and I was like, what the hell is Amish Romance? It's not so much that Amish Romance exists, because of course it does. Every possible combination of romance book exists. It was just that it's not categorized under Christian romance. It has its own subgenre. How is there enough Amish romance out there to qualify as its own subgenre? And over the next year-ish since then, I suddenly started noticing a lot of Amish romance books popping up in bookstores and libraries. Way more than there ever was before. I mean, there probably wasn't that much of it before, but there's a lot of it now. So I've been curious as to what the hell is going on there. But I just never really had the motivation to delve into it because, it's not something that I would read for fun. But then just recently I was like, oh, you moron. You have a YouTube channel where you review books. Just make a video about it. So that's what I'm doing. Before I even read any, I decided to research a little bit just to get a background on when and why this became a thing. Apparently Amish romance has existed as a subgenre of Christian romance for quite some time, which again does not surprise me. But just recently, in the last few years, it has exploded in popularity. Which kind of makes sense, given the whole cottagecore, simple country living aesthetic that's been very trendy lately. And apparently these books are not written for Amish people so much as they are for evangelical tradwives who romanticize that aesthetic to an insane degree. Which also makes sense to me. As many of you know, I also grew up in rural Pennsylvania, so I feel like I have more of a connection to the Amish community than the average person. I actually had Amish coworkers at the coffee shop where I worked for the year after college. I think they were technically Mennonite, which is why they were allowed to operate, coffee machines and stuff, but it's basically the same thing. So the book that I decided to read is called The Waiting. I don't have it with me today, which feels weird, because it was a library book and I already returned it. But here's a picture of it in case you need proof that it exists. I don't know why you would need proof that it exists, but again, I feel weird that I don't have it with me. Also, this might be a little bit nitpicky, but it's not a complaint so much as it is just a little bit confusing. I don't know who the woman on the cover is supposed to be, because I assumed it was the main girl, Jory, but there's multiple lengthy descriptions about Jory having beautiful bright red hair. And that woman on the cover is blonde, so I don't know who she is. So there's a bunch of characters in this book. I'm going to give you the shortest version that I possibly can. I'm sorry if it's a little bit confusing. So there's a family of 4 brothers: Cal, Ben, Matthew, and Ephraim. Cal is the oldest at 30, Ephraim is the youngest at 13, which is a hell of an age gap. Those parents were busy. Cal is initially married to a woman named Mary Ann, but she gets cancer and dies 5 chapters in, so you don't need to remember her. That sounded mean, but you know what I mean. She's not a super important character. And they have a daughter named Maggie. Cal is a good, hard-working, level-headed Amish man, and also the town minister, but he has some crazy opinions, that women should be allowed to express their opinions to their husbands. Wild stuff. Ben was a zesty, silly prankster with a bit of a temper, and he is engaged to a woman named Jory, who is the local school teacher. But he went off to serve in Vietnam because this takes place in the 60s. Ben told his family that he was tricked into signing up to go to Vietnam, but we find out later that that's not true. he just wanted to leave and didn't want to tell his family. He and Jory have kind of a weird relationship because he never technically proposed to her. They just had like a mutual understanding that like someday they would probably get married. When she found out that he was leaving to go to Vietnam, she told him that she wasn't going to wait for him. She was just going to go marry somebody else. And he still left, but she's still waiting for him. So, Matthew is a lot like Ben. He's also a bit of a mad lad who wants to go off and live away from the Amish community. So he signs up to go work at a military hospital in the city. Ephraim, I'm going to have to come back to him because he's got like telepathic powers or something. I'll get into it later, I can't explain it yet. Also, all of the brothers have a crush on Jory, even though she's basically their sister-in-law. I'll let Matthew explain why. Matthew had never seen such a color of hair as Jory's. When the sun hit it just right, like it had at church yesterday, it looked nearly as if it was on fire. For a moment, his mind wandered to a daydream of liberating her hair from the starched bonnet and those nasty-looking pins. God, Matthew, that's spicy. At Cal's hesitation, Matthew noticed Jory's back stiffen a notch. She was exasperated, Matthew realized, and it looked like steam trying hard not to rise from a kettle. He thought being mad made her look especially beautiful. A stain spread up her cheeks and her eyes got all wide and fiery. Passion, he thought. She was a woman with passion. Not like most girls he knew. Girls like Fat Lizzie, whose large eyes followed him around during meetings. He was looking forward to meeting more girls like Jory King while he was living in Lebanon. And yeah, they do refer to her as Fat Lizzie. For a spicy version, imagine her as Fat Amy from Pitch Perfect. Alright, so early in the book, we find out that Ben died in Vietnam, which is a bummer. And then shortly after that, Marianne also dies of cancer. So suddenly, Jory and Cal are both single and very emotional and have the opportunity to fall in love. And that is the main framework that this plot sits within, is Jory and Cal falling in love. But this book is going to be a little bit hard to explain, because there's like 5 different subplots that are all happening simultaneously but also separately. So it jumps around a lot. Like every couple paragraphs we're moved to some different character with a totally different perspective. So instead of trying to give you like a linear sequence of events, I'm just going to summarize each individual plot line from beginning to end. Firstly, we have the racism subplot. Literally the very first thing that happens in this book is that a black guy moves into town to be the new veterinarian. And all the Amish people are nice and accepting because they're good Christians who don't judge others. But the non-Amish people in town are all mean and racist and don't want a black guy to live there because it's rural Pennsylvania in the 1960s. So no one will let him rent a place to live, but the Amish people need a veterinarian, obviously, because they're farmers and they have like 500 animals. So Cal lets him rent a place on his property. But the racist guys don't like that, so they start vandalizing buildings in the Amish community and generally being assholes. And this leads to perhaps the most fascinating development in the entire book. Cal, Jory, Maggie, and Ephraim are hiking in the woods, and they're stopped by 3 of the racist guys who were mad at Cal for renting to a black guy. So they decide that they're going to beat him up, but Cal, being Amish, is a pacifist, so he refuses to fight back, but he also refuses to, like, run away. So he just stands there and lets 3 men beat him unconscious as, like, a flex of how good an Amish he is. It's very weird. Like, what does that accomplish? You're not, like, making a point about being nonviolent. You're just demonstrating that you're an easy target, you know? Like, if you're approached in the woods by 3 men who want to hurt you and you know that you're not going to fight them, you run away. I feel like that's just common sense. You don't just stand there and, like, let them do whatever they want to you. Luckily, the 3 racist guys get scared away by a mountain lion, and I'll get into the mountain lion subplot in a minute because it's wild. But yeah, he gets rescued by a mountain lion. Also, Jory refuses to call the police because vengeance is only for the Lord. But then later, one of the racist guy's dogs gets hurt, and the black veterinarian saves its life. So now the racist guy isn't racist anymore, I guess. Or at least not racist towards that specific guy, because he proved himself to be useful. So that plot point is resolved. I don't know what happens to the other two racist guys who beat Cal up, because they're never mentioned again. It's a somewhat rushed and unsatisfactory conclusion to this plotline, but it's also exactly what I expected, to be perfectly honest. Apparently the only reason this was in this book is because it's based on a real event that happened in the author's life, where a black guy moved into her rural Pennsylvania town, and everybody was, like, mean to him. But it's very obvious that, like, she didn't really know this man very well, and perhaps doesn't really understand all the nuances of how racism works in the real world. And I guess it doesn't need to, because this is like a fluffy romance novel where everybody has to be friends in the end, so that's what we get. It's hot in here, I'm showing off my slutty little forearms for you. On to the next and arguably most important plotline, the romance subplot. I don't know if you can tell, based on everything about me, but I don't really read romance books. It's just not something that I'm particularly interested in. But this romance is like so tame and fluffy and wholesome that it's a little bit charming. This is as spicy as it gets. He was bending to slip the list under the mat at the kitchen door when a flash of fire caught his eye. Sitting in front of the fireplace was Jory, brushing out her wet hair to dry by the fire's heat. It was long and thick, curling down to her hips, the color of burnished copper. He was transfixed for a moment. He allowed himself to drink in the sight of her. He'd never seen anything so lovely in all his life. No wonder the Bible said an uncovered woman ought to be shorn. He quickly turned away, trying to keep his thoughts focused on the Lord. All of these brothers are really horny for Jory's hair. Anyway, they only kiss like once in the entire like 200 whatever page novel. It's all just like, wow, she's so beautiful and amazing, and I don't know how to tell her. Should I hold her hand? Which is a little bit cute in how like wholesome and earnest it is. I also like that, kind of by definition, Amish romance has to embrace non-traditional beauty standards for the leads. Like, Cal's a 30-year-old Amish man with a full beard who dresses like a pilgrim. And I find that much more fun to read about than, like, the shirtless generic hunk with washboard abs that you would typically imagine in a romance novel. But anyway, because Cal and Jory are not really openly dating and they're just kind of silently mutually pining over each other, everyone is trying to set Cal up with different women, even though he keeps insisting that he's not ready to move on because his wife just died. But everyone wants Cal to get laid so bad, and all the women in town are just like champing at the bit to get with such an incredibly wise and godly and handsome Amish man. And then out of literally nowhere, like right after he starts being interested in Jory, Cal just like walks up to her and he's like, "Hey, do you want to be Maggie's new mom?" And Jory is like, "Slow down there, buddy. Your wife just died like 2 months ago and we've had like 3 conversations. Maybe let's wait a bit." But deep down, Jory does like him, and she honestly always hoped that Ben would grow up someday to be just like Cal. Cal does not give up, though. He keeps asking her until around 2/3 of the way through the book. She's like, "You know what? Sure." They haven't even kissed yet, but now they're engaged. Except plot twist time! Ben's not dead. Yeah, when Matthew was working at the Veterans Hospital, he finds out that Ben was just transferred there from a hospital in Vietnam. Which, honestly, I kind of wondered if they were going to pull that, because Cal's family never saw Ben's body, because they cremated him. And the first rule of fiction is that if you don't see a body, that guy's going to show back up. I just wasn't sure that they were really going to do that, because it would be really weird that, you know, Ben comes back and finds out that his fiancée is now engaged to his older brother. But they did, and now Ben's back. So now Jory is in a love triangle between 2 brothers. And this brings me into the next subplot, the Ben subplot. I'm not a huge fan of it. So Ben is alive in the Veterans Hospital, but he's in like a catatonic state because of whatever he experienced in Vietnam. And shortly after making this discovery, just like a week later, Cal just like barges into the hospital and literally like picks Ben up in like a bridal carry and just takes him out of the hospital. And he throws out all of his medication because Ben doesn't need that. Ben just needs God and family and the Amish lifestyle to recover from the severe trauma he experienced at war. And somehow everyone is shocked and confused when Ben is plagued by nightmares and flashbacks and mood swings. And he's gambling away his life savings and talking about going into business with non-Amish people and questioning their way of life. And they're all very upset and just want him to go back to normal because why is he behaving this way? It's not like they abducted him from the psychiatric facility and threw out all of his medication without ever asking him if that's what he wanted. And granted, it was the 60s, and mental health treatment was not at the level that it is today. But I still don't think that means that Cal, a farmer with a high school diploma, knows better than the people who study psychology professionally. Anyway, eventually, Ben reveals to Cal what happened in Vietnam. Basically, he and his friend were ambushed by a sniper, and the sniper killed Ben's friend, and then Ben shot the sniper in self-defense and is obviously like fucked up from that. And he like panicked and switched the dog tags with his dead friend so that no one would know that he killed someone. So that's why everyone thought that Ben was dead, because his dog tag was on the dead body. And Ben goes on to explain that the doctors had it all wrong. He didn't have depression or PTSD. He wasn't mentally ill. He was just overcome with the guilt and horror of what he had done and went into a dissociative state for months to cope with it. Yeah, Ben, that's what trauma is. I don't know why this is framed as like proof that like the doctors didn't know what they were talking about and Ben was never mentally ill, because like he's literally just describing what PTSD is. Luckily, Cal in his infinite wisdom knows exactly how to fix Ben's severe mental health problems, and it's just that he has to repent for his sins and let God forgive him and then go find the family of his dead friend and tell them what happened. And that seems to work. I don't know though, because it all happens off screen. Ben just leaves for a while, and then when he comes back, he's like totally normal. Apparently he went back to the mental hospital at some point, and the doctors were like, "My God, you're cured! I guess those Amish folks really do know better than us professional mental health experts." The way all of this is framed is very frustrating, if you can't tell from my demeanor. It's framed like Cal was doing some kind of like noble deed by like freeing Ben from the mental hospital and bringing him back home. And that really was the only reason that Ben got better, is because of Cal's godly wisdom, and like the treatment that Ben was getting was actually bad for him and making him worse. He, the doctor, had the gall to call Cal, that is a hard sentence to say, selfish and irresponsible for taking Ben away like he did. But that just showed how little the doctor knew. Cal was the most responsible, most unselfish person on this earth. A hot take, but I disagree. I think it's actually very selfish to take your mentally ill brother out of the hospital against his doctor's orders and throw out all of his medication. Because, you know, suddenly going off of mental health medication can, like, make you very ill, or potentially even, like, cause seizures and kill you. But I guess none of that happened, because, I don't know, the Amish lifestyle just fixed Ben. Because Cal is the family patriarch, and he knows what's best for everybody all the time, and we are wrong to question his innate wisdom. You know, I was a mentally ill teenager who attended Catholic school, and I was straight up told by teachers that it was a sin to be on medication, because antidepressants only give you false happiness. The only way to get true happiness is through the Lord. Just pray really hard and be really good, and maybe one day God will fix your broken brain. And if he doesn't, it's just because you weren't meant to be happy. Just accept that you were supposed to be miserable forever, because that's God's plan. Isn't that beautiful? Yeah, I think I'm actually going to just keep taking the medication that makes me a functional human being who doesn't want to die, but thanks for your unsolicited advice, Mrs. M. Anyway, after his miraculous recovery, Ben ultimately decides that he's going to go back to Vietnam for some reason. So he leaves, and now Jory can finally marry Cal like she really wanted to all along. And now for my personal favorite plotline of this book, the Mountain Lion. So when the new veterinarian comes to town, he gives Ephraim 2 tickets to the circus, and Ephraim really wants to go to see all the cool animals. But he knows that Cal won't allow it because there might be temptation at the circus, and his young mind cannot be influenced by it. So he and Maggie play hooky from school and like sneak off and go to the circus without Cal's permission. And there Ephraim meets a captive mountain lion that's on exhibit, and the two of them like lock eyes and have like a soul bond. And then later he finds out that the mountain lion got out of her cage and like escaped into the Pennsylvania wilderness. So he tracks her down and starts feeding her, and they become like friends. And that's why the mountain lion came to Cal's rescue and didn't eat him, because Ephraim was there, and they have like some kind of deep psychic connection. And also in that scene, he sees that she is now pregnant, implying that she met a male mountain lion somewhere in Lancaster County. But then when Ben comes back, he hunts down the mountain lion and kills her because she's been eating livestock. And Ephraim is devastated and screams at Ben that he wished he had really died in Vietnam because he's ruining everything, which is a cool thing to say to your severely mentally ill brother who just, you know, shot a wild animal because it was eating their farm animals. He does eventually apologize, and like granted he is like 13, and 13-year-olds say dumb shit sometimes, but that's still really dark, and I'm gonna circle back to it. But it's all okay, because Ephraim tracks down the mountain lion's 2 cubs and rescues them, and they get to go off to a wildlife reserve. So, it's a happy ending, and honestly, this plotline is insane, but I'm kind of into it. And that interaction between Ephraim and Ben leads me into the next section of this video, which I'm tentatively calling, oh wait, this is a cult. So reading this book was a wild ride, because every time I was lulled into a false sense of security by the cute romance, I was like jarred out of it by a line that makes me go, oh wait, that's right, the Amish are a cult. This story doesn't really work as a feel-good romance because it's set in a cult that dictates how all the characters have to act and think and feel at all times. And that leads to this very unsettling feeling as you read it, because there's just always something a little bit off. It's honestly very effective in like a religious horror kind of sense, but I don't think that's the vibe that they were going for. I'd also like to point out that like I read the author's bio, and apparently her grandfather was Amish and she was like raised within this community, so I'm assuming she knows what she's talking about and isn't just like pulling this belief system like out of nowhere. So here's a few quotes that jumped out to me as I was reading. This is right after Cal learns that Ben died and is crying alone in his room. She stopped, knowing he would feel shame if she found him grieving so deeply. It wasn't their way to express deep emotion. Doing so would seem like a complaint against the Lord. And here's Sylvia, who is Marianne's sister who doesn't like Jory. Sylvia knew she wasn't supposed to hate, that it was a sin. But it was a sin to think you were something special too, and that was Jory King in a nutshell. And then there's Matthew's entire character arc, which is where he initially wants to go off and be a mad lad and live in a city. But then he does and realizes that outsiders are weird and strange, and he doesn't like it out there. And the people, they're different. City folks constantly complain about the weather. It's either too hot or too cold or too wet. Even if it's dry and the crops and garden desperately need moisture, the weatherman would say that the weekend would be miserable because of the threat of rain. For me, coming from a farm that's tied to the weather, that way of thinking is crazy talk. Who ever heard of an Amish man complaining about the weather? That's because we know that God controls everything, Lizzie said quietly. The sun, the clouds, the wind, the rain. We know that complaining is finding fault with God. And then there is the very long and very on-the-nose conversation between Matthew and his landlord that kind of acts as a conclusion to this character arc. He was enjoying himself so much that he got a little carried away and kept going. He shoveled Mrs. Flanagan's neighbor's sidewalk and driveway, and then the neighbor after that. When he got back to the house, cheeks chapped red from the cold, Mrs. Flanagan stood on her glassed-in porch with black thunder on her face. "What do you think you're doing?" she asked him, holding the door open for him as he stomped snow off his boots. "Just shoveling." "Why did you shovel those neighbors' sidewalks, especially 2 houses over?" She sounded mad. "I was just enjoying the work. Is there a problem?" She stood there with her hands on her hips, angry. "Yes, there's a problem. I don't like that neighbor." She marched into the kitchen. Matthew was stunned. Part of being Amish was helping your neighbor. They didn't decide first if they liked someone or if that person deserved help. Helping each other throughout the year, loading silos, shocking corn stalks in the field, building barns, well, it went without saying. It was as much a part of being Amish as driving a buggy. He couldn't even imagine a single person in his church who wouldn't agree to help if someone asked. And he continues for multiple more paragraphs, being like shocked and appalled by the strange ways of the city folks and how the Amish way of life really is the best. And he never realized it until he left and realized how awful the rest of the world is. So naturally the conclusion to this character arc is that he decides to go back to being Amish. And it's implied that he and Fat Lizzie get into a relationship, even though the only reason he really started liking her is because she ignored him. Because I guess that's how you flirt with an Amish guy, you just don't talk to him for months. So you're not allowed to complain, you're not allowed to be sad, you're not allowed to be mad, you're not allowed to think you're special, you're not allowed to dislike people, you're not allowed to be anything other than happy and content and peaceful and helpful, and outsiders are weird and bad and sinful, and you should never question anything about your perfect Amish upbringing. Got it. And yeah, I think that people should generally try to, be nice and helpful and not be assholes to each other, but I take issue with a belief system that tells you it's morally bad to feel normal human emotions. Like that, it's weird. And all of these rules are just kind of accepted as like the natural rules that govern the world, and as long as you follow all of them, you'll be happy. It presents the Amish lifestyle as this like very idealistic fantasy world where we all live in harmony and love each other, and threats only come from the outside. Except of course for Ben. Finding out that Ben isn't dead is good at first because, hey, he's not dead. But then he starts causing problems and ruining the perfect happy Amish family that they've built in his absence. His trauma kind of throws a wrench into everything. And although Ephraim does eventually apologize for saying that he wished that Ben had actually died at war, that is kind of a sentiment that's echoed in the thoughts of several of the other characters. Like, I kind of get the sense that everyone would kind of prefer if he hadn't come back. Like, they love him, clearly, and they're trying their best, but they're ultimately, like, totally unprepared to deal with the reality of his issues. And Ben's fairly rushed character conclusion kind of reinforces this. He doesn't really get better with the help of his family. They're not willing to change and adapt to his needs. He has to go off and sort his stuff out on his own after they've offered some generic advice. And because he leaves in the end, the family never has to reconcile their complicated feelings or figure out how an angry, traumatized man could fit into this community, because Ben's not there anymore. So they basically all get to go back to the way that life was before they realized he was alive, but they also don't have to be sad about his death. So it's a happy ending for them. And this conclusion kind of reveals that there is no place for somebody like Ben in this community. They were never going to be able to accommodate his needs because their entire belief system centers around conforming. There is no room in a cult for deviation. Anyone different, anyone who can't meet the impossible standards, is going to have a bad time. Ben can't be who they all want him to be, so he has to leave. Obviously, I can't make sweeping generalizations about the entirety of the Amish romance genre from reading one book, but I think it does reveal who this is a fantasy for. It is for people who fetishize a fabricated version of the past, where people who are different than them just didn't exist or weren't allowed to be part of their society. A time and place where men were strong and level-headed and hardworking, and the patriarch of the family and the church was the ultimate authority. Women were content to cook and clean and make babies, and everyone was shielded from any kind of outside influence or temptation that might lead them to question their beliefs. Everyone believed the same things, dressed the same way, wanted the same lifestyle. The cult-like qualities of the Amish belief system aren't drawbacks, they're perks. It doesn't matter that the reality of Amish life isn't really as nice and sanitized as these books portray it, or that, you know, these harshly policed expectations end up being a nightmare for anyone who is even a little bit different. This is fiction, and the Amish are just a convenient tool for conveying these ideals. It's not like they're going to knock on your door and correct you. They don't read these books. This isn't their fantasy. All that being said, I think that I do generally have a higher opinion of this book than something like The 12th Prophecy. And if the culty vibes and questionable treatment of Ben hadn't, like, thrown me off so much, I think I would have enjoyed it. I would have found it kind of cute. If you're looking for a cozy romance with absolutely zero sex and you don't think about it too hard, this is fine. There were certainly parts that I enjoyed. I'm deeply fascinated by whatever Ephraim and that mountain lion had going on. Honestly, I would read a sequel where Ephraim grows up to be like an Amish Dr. Dolittle. So that's Amish Romance. My curiosity has been satisfied. I hope yours has been too. Currently it is summer, and that means that I'm spending a lot of my free time outside, being the feral biologist that I am. So there will be fewer videos throughout the warmer months of the year, but don't worry, as soon as it gets cold again and I'm stuck inside all the time, I'll be making a lot more. So I'll see you then, shipmates.